Okay, I think we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very, very special romance panel event with Buffalo Street Books. Whether you're watching in Ithaca or somewhere else in the country or in the world, Buffalo Street Books is a co-op, so a community-owned independent bookstore here in Ithaca. We're very community-oriented, and we love doing events that bring other organizations within our larger community together. And I'm so excited to be here with three incredible romance authors to talk about issues of consent and what it means to write romance and to write healthy relationships in romance. And I probably should have introduced myself. I'm Isabella. I'm the events manager at Buffalo Street Books, and I'm also the children's bookseller. But I do read a lot of romance, and it's very seldom that I read stuff that doesn't have romance in it, even if it's not in the romance genre. So I have three incredible authors here today. We have Adriana Herrera, we have Meryl Wilsner, and we have, of course, Rosie Danan, who is whose book, The Roommate, just came out on September 15th. So I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. And if you guys could just introduce yourself and also say your preferred pronouns. Why don't we start with Lynn? I'll just go clockwise on my screen.
Great. So I'm Lynn Stack. I'm the Youth Education Coordinator at the Advocacy Center. And the Advocacy Center is the agency in the nonprofit in Tompkins County providing support and services for people who've experienced or been impacted by domestic violence or sexual violence in any form. So, yeah, and I'm really excited to be here. I have loved reading all three of your books. And I think I'll pass it on to Leah, and then we'll go to the authors.
Yeah, hi, I'm Leah. I don't really know what my role is anymore, but I was Lynn's intern over the summer and over the past year. I'm a first-year university student studying human development and human rights, and I'm also super excited to be here and to be a part of this conversation. I love conversations like this, and I love the focus that Rosie's book has on talking about sex openly. And I haven't actually read Meryl and Adriana's books yet, but I'm like in the process of getting them. I'm really excited to read those also because I definitely need to do more like reading for fun.
I guess me.
Yeah.
I am Adriana Herrera. I am a romance author, and I also lived in Ithaca and worked for the Advocacy Center for 2 years. Have deep love for everyone there, and it was my honor to be part of that agency and the work that they do. It changed me in a lot of amazing ways. They do so much for the Ithaca community and the larger Tompkins County community. So I am so happy to be part of this conversation, talk about The Roommate, which is a wonderful book and exactly where I want romance to go, because I think books like this really are the future of romance. So I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, me too. I am Meryl Wilsner. My pronouns are they, them. And I, like everyone, am thrilled to be here. The Roommate, obviously, is wonderful. We all know. But yeah, just talking about this conversation, I think is going to be like the exact conversations that I love most having when in talking about writing romance and within the romance community. I'm just absolutely thrilled and looking forward to it.
Hey everyone, I'm Rosie. My book, The Roommate, I do have it near me for purposes of promotion, and I kind of match it. Oh, thank you. And yeah, I'm also thrilled to be here and super excited for this conversation. So many smart people who are doing great work, both in romance and outside of it. And I love when we get to talk about the intersections of our writing and the world that we live in and the world we want to continue to build together. So thank you to Buffalo Street Books for hosting us. And yeah, thrilled to dive in.
Yeah, before I have you all take it away with some wonderful topics. We were all very impressed with when we were seeing the things that we're going to be discussing tonight. I'm wondering, Rosie, if you could give a quick pitch for those who might not yet have gotten to read The Roommate, of what they can expect. Correct.
Yes, very smart. So The Roommate is my debut. It's a romantic comedy, sometimes affectionately called a rom-com, which just means it's a high heat, slow burn. It's about an inconvenient attraction between two unlikely roommates whose simmering chemistry sparks a plan to overthrow a porn empire.
Rosie has the best tagline. I have heard it many times and I love it.
An unlikely lease on love.
Yes, that is the light on the lease, if you will.
Wow. So I want to jump right in and just say this was a really fun, sexy book to read, and I want to ask you about. I guess it's the high heat part of the slow burn, and I am a huge fan of slow burn. I think because for me, no is such an important part of yes when we're talking about consent. And so I love it when characters just can say no way, or I'm not sure, or not now, and that gets respected. And for me, that makes the sex scenes even sexier when yes, when it is a yes. So in The Roommate, though, Clara and Josh are sexual pretty early on. Like it's not a long burn there. And they move like literally on one page. Clara moves from saying, I barely know you, to saying, I'm saying yes. But I believe her. Like I believe that yes. And I trust Josh already. And more importantly, I feel like Clara trusts Josh. And then like with her vulnerabilities, like, you know, over the next couple of pages. And so I just wanted to jump right in and ask you, like, if you could talk a little bit about constructing a relationship and about the consent between them, especially in that first scene when like you had just started to build their relationship.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like their physical relationship really evolves, and their first interaction, to your point, they have only known each other, I think, for about a week's time. They are obviously like living in close proximity, and Claire as a character is not known for being very like risk excited. Like the
complete opposite of that.
Yeah, she's very like control oriented and all of that.
Scrunchy on the door.
Scrunchy, yes.
Yeah.
But I think like the situation that she finds herself in with Josh is that they're communicating about their sexual experiences. And that's been facilitated by him walking in on her watching one of his porn videos, as people are wont to do. But I think because they're having like a pretty frank dialogue, I think that helps build the trust. So like they're starting out by talking about previous experiences, and also they're talking about values. So Josh is actually talking about the fact that he, you know, really believes that physical intimacy encounters should be pleasurable for both partners. And so when Claire is talking about her experiences and she's saying, you know, I didn't kind of want to like make other people feel bad if I wasn't meeting their expectations, or it was just easier for me to take care of things myself. It's kind of like, it really is a question about values. And he's like, no, I think that those encounters should be different for you, because I believe that, you know, all people should be enjoying those kind of encounters when they're consenting to them. And so I think that open dialogue helps. And then they really do, I think for Clara's comfort, build a lot of kind of like very explicit details into the interaction. Mm-hmm. So it's very much like, are you going to be more comfortable if like I use certain parts of my body to touch you? Are you going to be more comfortable if like you can keep some of your clothes on? And like they're negotiating all of those things so that when she does consent to the encounter, it's very, very, very clear what's going to happen. It's also, he really takes a lot of things that she's concerned about off the table. Like they continue to communicate throughout the encounter. So he's saying, you know, at no point am I gonna ask for something after this. Like it's not about my ego. He's like, and I think that's why he's able to have that successful encounter with her when other people haven't, because he is helping her to feel comfortable emotionally as well as physically. So even though it does take place quite early, and it probably, and I mean, Clara does admit it's quite out of character for her to agree to that, but she sees it as kind of like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I think having failed at another kind of big leap that she took earlier in the book, she's like, well, maybe I'll just try again and see if this could be better. So I think all of those components allow that interaction to happen.
Yeah, well, I definitely wanted her to say yes. I wasn't like, no, don't do that.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted her to step into this opportunity. And so we said a lot, I think, about like the character of Josh, but also their communication, like you said, with each other. Yeah.
I think as a reader of it, you mentioned, Lynn, that Clara trusts Josh, and as a reader, I trust Josh right away there.
Right.
And I think that as Rosie was mentioning, it really comes down to that he is making this about Clara from the very beginning. It's not like, oh, I'm interested in her, so I'm going to find a reason to, become physical with her in some way. It is 100% like, this is something that I am doing for this other person. I am interested in what she wants and doing what's best for her. And that, I think, is just immediately made me as a reader trust him more. No part of him. I mean, it's not that he's not attracted to Clara, right, but no part of him is doing that really like for himself. And that, even though it's so early on, and even as readers, we don't know the characters that well yet, that I made it really easy to trust him for me.
Yeah, when we were talking, we had a conversation about this piece, the consent piece before. I always think about consent as like a social contract that's happening from like the moment the two people meet, right? And then you have like power dynamics of both of them, their places, their positionality, right? He's a man. We live in a patriarchy, so he's already at an advantage. So it's his job to make sure there's equity, and he does that from the beginning. He airs everything out. Like, he is invested in that clear communication and letting her know where she stands with him at every step of the way. And that social contract begins with them, like from the moment they meet. Yes. And so by the time she says yes, they've already been building up to that. So I think that's why that yes seems so natural. And also because of the place in her life she's in. Like, she's like, it's like a moment of reckoning. Like, I need to make some changes about how I live my life. So sure, like, this sounds like a good idea. So yeah,
yeah. I love that you brought that up, because they are negotiating being roommates. And you're so right that like the consent between them is already developing. And Josh is very clearly wanting her to be saying what she wants and what she needs in their relationship as roommates. Yeah.
He really feels the responsibility of that. And I think that's something that comes across a lot with his character. Like, he really doesn't, like, he takes himself seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think as I was reading this, I was just like, I want a Josh. Like, Leah and I were both talking about another event that we did together where the character, the consent is a huge topic in that book. And I think that when writers pay attention to making sure, whether even if it's not a book that's about the topic of consent the way that some specific books are, that when you pay attention, when you deliberately make sure that consent is a part of the discussion, that it is a part of the act, it automatically makes the characters more, I guess, enduring to the reader, at least on my end. So I'm also interested to hear from Meryl and Adriana how you work to sort of to construct consent in your books.
Yeah, so something to talk about is my debut, which I also have on hand. And in my debut, it is a relationship between a boss and an assistant, and it is absolutely the slow part of slow burn. And it is that way because of the issues of consent. These two people, Joe and Emma, in my book, are very much on different platforms in terms of power, and Joe, who is the boss, recognizes that. And so the whole book is them both grappling with making sure they're on equal footing. And before anything physical happens at all, they've, as Adriana said, consent has been building in their relationship this whole time, even though throughout most of the book they aren't physical with each other, or sexually intimate or anything like that. That doesn't mean that consent hasn't been taking place and building and strengthening between the two of them. And to be honest, I think that my book kind of annoyed people in how slow it was, and sometimes as the writer, it annoyed me in how slow it was. But it was something like specific, especially with these specific characters. It was so important to the characters themselves to get that consent, and make sure that consent wasn't coming from that it wasn't a, oh, Emma's saying yes, but she's saying yes for underlying reasons, rather than just, yes, this is actively what I want. And so that's just sort of how it happened. It was required within the story and within those characters to be that slow, so that when that final yes, is said, it is completely established that both of them understand this is a yes. This is me actively choosing this. This has nothing to do with, you having power over me or taking advantage of me or anything like that. And yeah, that was really important to me to lay out in their story.
Yeah, definitely. And when I was, I too loved something to talk about. And yeah, it has the slowest of slow burn romances, and I love a good slow burn romance. And it's hearing you talk about that's incredible. Like, it's never something that, as a reader, that I would think about is that the reason that it's so slow, that the burn really drives out is to make sure that consent is established and that it is done correctly. I think that's just so incredible. Adriana, do you want to talk about it?
I guess I can talk about my latest. It's here to stay.
Yeah.
And it's
pretty covers.
Yes, it's a beautiful cover. I think, like I said, I write, like, this book specifically I write Black women, I write Afro-Latinx women, and men, or people of all genders, but I center Afro-Latinx characters. So if I have an interracial relationship, which this is, the hero is a white man, I have to think a lot about, positionality, right? Like, a Black woman and a white man already, in the world we live in, there's a power dynamic there that puts him at an advantage. Like, he's upright and breathing, and that means he has an advantage over her, because of the white supremacy that we live in. So I have to think about that, and also like how the bodies of Black women have been commodified, and the way that they've been portrayed in fiction as over-sexualized, and all those things have to, I'm not necessarily talking about it in the book, but I am thinking about it in terms of how these people move in the world and how they come together. So for this book, it's probably my slowest burn book. The sex doesn't happen till 2/3 into the book, 70%. And again, people were also like, oh my gosh, the slow burn. And I'm like, well, he was she's in a position of he's going to cut her program, and her program is serving refugee children. So she can hold off until she makes sure that this person is a person that she can trust in that way. So it took long. It's the same thing that Meryl was saying. Sure, they could have kissed in at 30%, but what made sense for that relationship, for Meryl's book's relationship, is that trust was solid. So I think a lot about that, and I've written this is my 7th book. So, and I have all different types of relationship. I have relationships between two men, which are, there's also a different dynamic there if it's two Dominican men as opposed to a billionaire white passing Latinx man and a Black man. So all these, or my 3rd book is it's set in Ithaca. It's an Haitian professor who's a Black Lives Matter activist, and the other hero is a prosecutor who's white. And the external conflict is that there's racially motivated police stops happening in town, and they're not at odds because they both know it's not the right thing that is happening, but the world puts them at odds. So I have to think about like the intersections, I guess, of the way that consent can happen for the people that I write about because of the identities that they live with.
This is one of the things I love about all three of you as authors, is that I really felt an attention to the power dynamics and the social dynamics between the characters, and how that impacted them growing in their trust with each other. That like there was some explicitness about like there are some trust differences between these different people, and how do they negotiate that, and how do they build, like trust doesn't just happen, like instantaneously. How do they build their relationship and really build their trust with each other? So yeah, I guess that, and even Rosie, in your book, like the high heat, but I feel like there is a real slow burn in their romance with each other, and that area of trusting each other takes a lot longer in some ways, like to really think about that, like how are they going to trust each other as potentially romantic partners. But yeah.
Yeah,
I was going to say something about equity in Rosie's book, because I think like I feel like the romance, like the feelings part is where there was more equity between them, right? Because Josh, he knew what he was doing with the body parts, but
exactly.
He was really vulnerable was with the feelings, and that is where they both had to come to the table in a different way. And you did that beautifully, Rosie.
Oh, thank you. I love, like the emotional vulnerability. I mean, I think both emotional and physical vulnerability, like, are things that I really like to explore and to make sure are showing up in the relationship dynamics. But yeah, there's like a lot of, besides just like the physical intimacy, like there's a lot for Josh and Claire to negotiate and to kind of, they come from very different like worldviews, like socioeconomic status is like a big differentiator between them. And so they kind of have several discussions about that. And obviously like Josh's sex work is something like Claire doesn't understand that world. A lot of this is about her coming into that world and learning about the experiences of sex workers. And a lot of that is the stigma that they're facing. And both Clara and Josh have internalized societal expectations because of the way that they were born, and then later on the roles they take in adulthood. And so, yeah, it was like, I really like the way they help each other navigate those. And ultimately, like as they're growing in those aspects of trust as well, that's when I think the physical intimacy gets unlocked in ways that it's not in those earlier encounters.
Absolutely. And I think both you and Adriana mentioned, like you just mentioned, societal expectations. And Adriana talking about, that the world putting your two characters at odds. I think that in all of our books, we recognize that we're not writing in a vacuum. I'm not just these two characters who I'm writing about falling in love. Yes, they're in a fictional world. I've created them, all of that. But I'm still writing in, America in 2020 or like 2018 or whenever I was writing this one. So I think that the world around us plays a really big role for all of us, and really impacts our writing, both in terms of consent, but just in terms of everything. Recognizing that we aren't writing in a vacuum adds a lot to the work that we do to make our romances realistic.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too far off our outline because I know we have like a juicy outline, but I just want to build on what you're saying, Meryl, because I think in each of our books, there's sort of this acknowledgement of the world around us, but there's also like an optimism that I think can be really helpful for people right now, especially. Like when you just see people that are succeeding in their quest to kind of change the societal structures that are holding back marginalized people. I think that's something that's going across like all of our books. And when I read both of your books, like that's something that's really heartening for me, and because I've just like living in the real world can be so disheartening, but we need to like keep going. And so I think romance, in addition to the HEA, which we all talk about as being kind of like something that brings us comfort, I also find comfort just from having characters navigate the difficult situations of everyday life, but win. And there's like a joyfulness and obviously the love that comes out of that is just like fuels my soul.
Yeah. There's like, I always like wish I were taking notes. Never get it all down. So I think the next thing we wanted to talk about is, I think, traps that you want to avoid, or that you personally feel are the things that you want to avoid when you're writing romance in your books. Whether that's certain tropes that you are like that are a no-no, or that for you personally, or that you just don't like reading about, which is another question. Are there certain tropes that, I think this is more of a creative question, but a little off topic, but are there sort of tropes that you thought you didn't like reading about, but then ended up putting in your own books because you were like, oh, well, actually, this makes sense?
I don't know that I've taken on any tropes that although to be fair, there's very few tropes that I can't get behind. I'm like real into tropes. But I think like one of the original part of your question was around like, what are things we try to avoid? And I think while we have acknowledged a lot of the positive ways that consent can be portrayed in romance, I think it is worth kind of noting, and we had talked about this in our kind of previous discussions, that having consent in your book is more than just characters saying yes, because there's also a lot of factors that influence consent. And Meryl, you kind of touched on this, but like, you don't like coerced consent and things like that. And even things like having characters consuming alcohol and then getting into like a physical interaction, like consent can't be upheld necessarily in that situation. And so I think I don't know if anyone else wants to kind of build on that, but I think those are some of the things we wanted to talk about avoiding.
Yeah. I mean, I think like I'm writing historical right now, and I'm writing about a duke. And so like a duke, like a white guy who's a duke with a black woman in 1879 in Britain is like hard to write and to build, and especially like going to like what the conventions of historical romance are, when you usually have these heroes who are kind of like aristocrats that kind of don't have a lot going on other than like fencing and drinking brandy. And so like, and then like they become aware of their larger world, and that's like their emotional arc. And so to me, right, like I can't write a hero that's like not aware of like systemic oppression and be a viable hero for a black woman in 1879. So he has to come like preloaded with awareness. So I'm like, I guess I'm gonna have to make him like half American. He's a Quaker now. Like I have to like do something, because I have to build in like to avoid the trap of then building a character who really cannot be a viable hero for a black woman. Because he has to be aware of certain things and his privilege and his position in the world and how that impacts his interactions with her. Like, and I think that's kind of like thinking about those large, like bigger picture things, as Meryl was saying. Like we're writing our little books and our little worlds with our characters, but we're writing it within a world that has complexities, and we all are writing for people who haven't been able to read themselves in stories, right? We're all here writing from a place of like, we're trying to put on the page things that people like us haven't gotten the opportunity to see reflections of themselves. And so we have to like really honor that and like do it in a way where we're not falling into like, I don't have the luxury of writing a duke who's like just goes and fences and like drinks brandy, because he's going to be falling in love with a black woman in like Victorian England.
Yeah, I think that
a way to read that, by the way.
Yeah, I'm very excited for all of your next books. But yeah, I think that in terms of traps to avoid, thinking of, as Rosie said, thinking of consent just as, somebody said yes, so therefore we move on. And that goes to Adriana's point as well, is you know, a Black woman and a white duke in that time, you have to still make it work. You can't just go, oh, they both say yes, so it's fine. So I think that the trap to avoid is sort of not thinking deeply and critically about consent itself as you're writing it, but also, you know, feminism or anything that you are portraying, making sure that you're going beyond sort of just the surface level or, you know, sort of archetype of like, okay, this person is really, you know, woke or whatever, and therefore they're good. Going deeper and making sure that you're actually mining these things and getting to a, I just keep saying deeper, but you know, a more underlying thing than just, okay, they both said yes, they both like each other, therefore it's consent. Recognizing that there's more to it. And there's more to pretty much any interaction that we are writing between the characters than what it appears on the surface. And I think that that's a trap that you can easily fall into, especially if you're just sort of paying lip service to something instead of, you know, if you're like, oh, well, I know consent's important, so in books these days, so I'll put it in. That's a trap that you're just going to easily fall into. In the same way that, you know, white people being like, oh, well, I guess books are supposed to be diverse, so I'm going to make this character Black. Like, that's not how you do it. That doesn't work. And that's something that you can fall into if you're not actually trying to do well by your characters and by your readers.
Yeah. I think then all of that is just and I think there are writers that are listening as well, or those that are writing romance, because I think you're giving such great advice, and that's something that should always be on your mind when writing romance. Like, I'm not a romance writer myself. I don't have that ability, but it's definitely something that seeing how much effort you all put into that, all the sort of the detail and the care is really incredible to hear about. And it makes me want to go back and reread all of your books, which is not a bad way to spend the night anyways. But I think then the next order of business is talking about sexual freedom as resistance. And I think that's particularly evident, I found, in The Roommate, and how Josh and Clara kind of go to topple a certain empire. I'm being a little bit vague because I think that I'm seeing some people like on Goodreads and whatnot being a little bit surprised by, because I think that in particular the summary on the back of the book is purposefully vague, and I think it's so funny when I see people coming to the realization of what Josh does, and I think it just cracks me up.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on that briefly, it is like the narrative is set up in a way that you are invited to get to know Josh as a person before you define him by his profession. And, you know, that's not necessarily going to be an invitation that everyone wants to accept, but that is kind of like the way, that is the reason the narrative is set up that way, that you're kind of learning at the same time that Clara's learning about him. And yeah, and also I don't feel like it's like super secret, but
no, it's not.
But I think, I'm always heartened when people do go into the book and it, you know, is a pleasant surprise for them.
Yeah, I think the sexual freedom as resistance goes sort of along with traps to avoid, and what Adriana said about that we're writing, you know, characters, you know, we maybe didn't get to see ourselves, and we're not, you know, Isabella, as you said, oh, seeing the work that you put into it to make sure we get it right. It's sort of not an option, I feel like, for us, that, you know, we have to put in this work, because we've been sort of told, if not explicitly, then implicitly by what mainstream romance has published in the past, that, you know, we as writers or our characters don't necessarily deserve a happy ending because we haven't seen many in mainstream romance for a lot of these types of characters who we are writing, you know, marginalized characters being marginalized in whatever way, in race, in gender, and orientation, in their job, and what they do for work. And so so that sort of sexual freedom as resistance, I think, comes from a place where people, both as as actual people and as these characters, have been told that their sexuality or their gender or what they're interested in is immoral or sinful or disgusting, and sort of accepting that and finding joy in your physical relationships and your sexual intimacy, regardless of the fact that other people may have told you this. I think is sort of why I write it. That I really like the idea of my characters taking joy in each other, regardless of what anybody else thinks.
Yeah, the last book in the Dreamer series, American Sweethearts. It's set in New York City, and it's Priscilla, who is a police officer. She's a detective, and she's really burnt out by it. But her true passion is to be a sex educator in her community, and her community is Afro-Latinx people. One of her best friends is a trans man, and they have a workshop that they do about intimacy and pleasure, during transition. And like the idea is that like she sees the work of being able to help her community kind of like really decolonize their bodies and decolonize their pleasure and their sexuality, and like have the freedom to like truly like lock into what brings them joy, and like the joys that their body can bring to them, and that a partner or partners who are invested in their pleasure can like be a place of joy and like liberation. And I really like look to Audre Lorde's essay, The Uses of the Erotic, when I was writing that book, because she talks a lot about how the patriarchy really like socializes those of us in the margin. And like she specifically is talking about like queer bodies, female bodies, around like not trusting the places that are like our sources of power, and like our pleasure is a source of power. Like the pleasure that we can find in our body is a source of power, and we're taught to just not trust that. Like we're taught to think that that's a place of shame for us. And so being able to write about people like us, like, all right, like these different identities that have been marginalized or portrayed in ways that are really reductive, and having them, these people, these bodies like become like places of joy and freedom, is like, I think it's radical work. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to put out there for readers who are not used to seeing us in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of people, when they talk about The Roommate, they're like, it's very, very explicit. It's very, very explicit. And I think about that because, I mean, like I said, it's high heat. There's sex scenes, absolutely. But romance as a genre has been, churning out a lot of high heat stuff for a really long time. And I think that certain readers are taking away this like added explicitness, because there are conversations around porn, there are people that work in porn, and they read that as explicit in a different way. And so that's been hard for me. Obviously, like as an author, you can like never engage in feedback on your work and stuff, but I think that's something that people could potentially examine, is like what kind of personal bias are they bringing into their interpretation of these stories. And I wonder if you guys, Meryl and Adriana, if you've kind of experienced that as well.
My book is, even in ignoring, people sort of mischaracterizing discussions of porn as explicit, my book is still substantially less explicit than The Roommate. So that's not something that I've personally experienced with my book. But I do understand where you're coming from. And also I think in terms of your book does really focus on female pleasure specifically. And I think that is potentially another place where people may be like, ooh, like this is explicit, because they're not used to that. So it seems sort of more explicit than just a book about male pleasure or whatever. And that comes about in the way that they rate movies, and, seeing a female orgasm on screen comparing to seeing a male. It's like, oh, this has to be NC-17 now because we've seen a woman's face. And I think they also do this. And I feel like, Adriana, you can probably talk about this because you've written both same-sex and different sex relationships, that often readers will see in a same-sex relationship will imagine it as more explicit when it's not, when, there was nothing more explicit. It's just like any other, high heat romance, but because it's two people of the same sex, that suddenly, readers decide that is more explicit. I certainly have seen that happening with other people's books.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been interesting because I've written like lesbian couples, I've written gay couples, I've written cis couples, het couples who are both cis people. Like with Sweethearts, there's a pegging scene. Priscilla, like there's a pegging scene with Pris and Juan Pablo, and like some people just cannot deal with pegging. I'm just like, wow, that's interesting, because she's a sex educator. They've been together since they were 16. They're in their mid-30s. Like, you gotta get creative. So it's been interesting to see like the things that people react like with my holiday novella. It's a lesbian romance. So it's two Dominican women, and it's very high heat, and people like also like, oh my goodness. I'm like, there's like two. Okay, it seems like a lot because it's like 30,000 words, but it's like 2.5 sex scenes.
Oh, I love a half sex scene. That's great.
A half thing that happens. But yeah, it's true. I think, and also when I feel like when the woman is kind of like on top a little bit, like she's the more like the one that's like more verbal or more expressive, it does make some readers feel some type of way. And I think it's because we have been socialized to expect, like we're still really stuck on those heteronormative, like very like cis white gender roles of how people can be sexual together.
Yeah, we talked about this in our discussion beforehand. Also, I talked about this in terms of how I first, growing up, how I first learned about consent. And, it was taught to me as like, don't let boys do things that you don't want to do. And there was no like accompanying, boys may also not be interested in sex in certain ways. Like that just wasn't part of the conversation. And I think that sort of is still the case for many people, and goes along with this point of that, we're sort of conditioned to see like men are the sexual creatures, men are the dominant creatures, like that is what is acceptable. And so even if you get some real filthy men, as long as it's men talking or, men doing it, it's what you expect. And therefore you don't react in that, oh, this is really explicit sort of way. Whereas when it's something that you're not expecting, you see it as more explicit, even if it isn't.
Yeah, and there's that piece I also feel like, and that's something that like, it's very different in the dynamic in the roommate, is that when a man is experienced, he's just giving it to you, and then you will like it because he's so good at it, as opposed to him engaging with you and coming to you as like, these are the things that we could do together, and not like, I'm a billionaire who's 55 and I will show you pleasure. And that dynamic is really what I don't want to see anymore in romance.
I think that dynamic, Leah and I talked about this a little bit, is we also, Leah and I both just recently read Chanel Miller's book, Know My Name. And we were talking about like one of the things that Josh doesn't express is that sense of entitlement, right? That like, I'm attracted to you, therefore sex is going to happen, right? Or they're like, I'm just entitled to what I want, as opposed to I'm offering, or, you know, not even like I'm asking, but like I'm offering, you know, like, and it's up to you, which is much more Josh's position. And then I was wondering, because I know this is something Leah wanted to talk about. I wanted to, in terms of, this isn't so much, well, this relates to the sexual dynamics, but also I think romantic tropes. One of the things that I really dislike is kind of the romantic notion of like constructing a couple as you and me against the world. And that this is like, we are like, so like it's us, and what's romantic about it is it's us against everybody else. And I think it's probably because of doing a lot of work around intimate partner violence and really seeing the unhealthy ways that becomes isolating and controlling. But one of the things I loved about this book is that there are these other strong characters. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Naomi and her character. And I think I know this is a character that Leah has a lot of thoughts about, so maybe let her ask the question, or start the conversation.
Yeah, so right off the bat, I'm obsessed with Naomi as a character. I think she is the most incredible, like, she is, I'm not allowed to use bad words, so I'm not going to do that. But she is such a powerful woman, and I love that I love her backstory. We get so little of it, and I want more, which is why I'm so excited about this coming book. Because you learn that she kind of got into the sex industry by virtue of like sharing pictures with someone that she trusted, sharing nude pictures, and then those pictures were distributed. And so she went to LA and started working in the porn industry as a way to kind of reclaim her sexuality to some extent, or to kind of to own what had happened and feel empowered by it to some extent, I'd say. Although there's definitely, as we can see in the book, there's definitely power dynamics in the internal workings of the porn industry and the sex industry, that even if you go into it looking for empowerment, there's so much going on that sometimes it can be hard to find that. It seems to some extent like Naomi has found empowerment through her sex work and through her work with Josh specifically, and then the work that she does, I don't want to spoil anything, but the work she does with Clara and Josh later in the book. But she's just such a dynamic, fantastic character. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about her role in Josh and Clara's relationship and the formation of that as Josh's ex, but kind of not necessarily a romantic ex, and kind of more of a person of, I don't know exactly, importance in his life.
Yeah, I'm so, first of all, like, thank you for saying so many nice things about Naomi, because I really love her. But yeah, so, I mean, you mentioned so many things, I want to make sure I'm chatting about them. So Naomi is a character, and her kind of like getting into sex work, and like, does she find that empowering? Yes, I think, like, you know, to your point, the experiences, like, it was her journey into coming into LA. She really is like taking back ownership over her body and the way that it's portrayed and the way that she uses it, and her relationship with adult performing. There is a lot of consent, and it's explored about how, like, she has kind of like negotiated her way through the industry to kind of be paired with the right partners and things like that. So her relationship with Josh is very multifaceted. So they meet performing. So their initial engagement is a professional one, and they find that they like working together. They like being intimate together. And they do, I think, have a friendship that, obviously this all happens off the page because their relationship happened before the story, but it's nice to be able to share that with you guys. And so, yeah, and I think and she does kind of touch on this in her discussions with him in The Roommate, where she talks about, like, we had something really good as a business partnership. We trusted each other. and we kind of tried to make that work in a romantic way, but sort of discovered that we were better off as and I really do think as partners, but not as romantic partners. So, and then she does have relationships with both Josh and Clara in the book. So with Josh, I think she feels really protective of him. Naomi pretty much feels protective over everyone like that she meets, which I think is kind of funny, because I think it is about her being underneath kind of her armor. She's a very soft person, and so she just wants everyone to be protected. So she, you know, she kind of tries to look out for him both in business and in affairs of the heart, if you will. And then she actually builds a relationship with Clara as well, where I think she really recognizes Clara as someone that's like in over her head, which is, I think, fair. And she does. And one thing that Naomi does that I thought was really important is when Clara decides to get involved with adult performers in a professional capacity, Naomi is the person that says, like, what kind of gives you the right to do this? Like, you have no experience here. Like, why do you even want to be a part of these conversations? And I think that was really important because it's true. She doesn't. And like, so having Naomi be there and have that dialogue with Clara was important. She does give Clara like a shot. She kind of says, like, either you can rise to the occasion and you can be professional in this setting, or you're not going to make it. Which again, I don't think is her being harsh. I think that's actually like her giving Clara opportunities to grow and to change. And that's kind of the core of their dynamic in this book. And I think that was most of the questions that you asked about Naomi. Is that fair? Did I miss anything, Leah?
I think you covered everything. I love Naomi so much. I think she's such a cool lady, and I'm so excited to learn more about her.
Thank you. Someone in the live chat is saying how that Naomi's such a wonderful character. So
that is so flattering, and I hope that everyone likes her book. Like, it's always interesting, I think, when you have a character that people really like, you know, there's like more pressure to do right by them in their own narrative. And I think what people like about Naomi to some extent is that she is really tough, and she is really tough. But her book that comes out in April is very much an exploration into her vulnerability. And so I hope that people like accept her for that. I think she would be really nervous if she knew that everyone was going to read about her thoughts.
I am lucky enough to, when I finish my revisions this week, get to read Naomi's book early. That's one of the bonuses for finishing my revisions. I also love Naomi, and to Lynn's point, sort of beginning this discussion was about how, you know, not liking it as like just this couple against the whole world, and Naomi definitely serves a great role of, you know, it's not just Josh and Clara and everybody else is bad. They have, you know, Naomi is an excellent partner, you know, who's on the same footing as them and does challenge both of them, but also sort of provides a friendship for both of them. But definitely it makes it so that it's not just Josh and Clara. I think that that the roommate is very focused on their relationship, but they have these other people helping them, and they're with them, and it's not just solely focused on these two with no look at the outside world. And I think, Lynn, as you were talking about, that is important, that they have other characters with them and on their side.
Yeah, because I feel, I mean, one, I love books that have exes where the exes aren't evil. You know, that like that like they can still be in the story in a positive way. And like you were saying, that like maybe their romantic relationship didn't work out, but Josh and Naomi actually are really strong together in other ways. But I also love Clara's aunt, having Jill in the story, and then the ways in which they both really sort of come out to their families in different ways. And it's not a queer story, but there are these things that they have to tell their families, and then their families being more accepting of them than they expect at different points. And so I just love the way that they are surrounded by these other people who are making them and then their relationship with each other stronger. But
yeah, and I also just I have to ask this, like, as a bookseller and as someone who just loves books, is like all three of you have had books come out sort of during this crazy time in the world, and I'm sure that having all these virtual events has not been at all what you planned when you first found out that you were going to be published authors. And so for example, I read The Roommate as like on my tablet, and that was quite literally the second ebook I have ever read in my life. I had a very bad headache. I get very bad headaches reading on screens, but I pushed through. The only two like ebooks that I've ever read were during quarantine. And so I'm wondering, do you think that's going to change? Are you possibly going to get physical arcs of the Intimacy Experiment? Do you think that are there things that you hope that you'll be able to do for I know, Meryl, you have an upcoming book. I know, Adriana, you have upcoming books. Is there things that also as booksellers and as readers that we can do to support you during this time? Because that's always very important to me. Because I know that this is not what the format you are expecting when you think of a book tour and release day.
Yeah, it's hard. I know, like, both Meryl and I debuted in this. Adriana, you've got like a whole slate of books that could potentially come out during this time, and it's really hard. Like, obviously there are pros, like I get to be having this conversation with you all, and that's wonderful. But yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, and I definitely was really nervous, to be open with you, about having two pandemic books, like with the second book coming out in April, like probably still going to be in the pandemic. And yeah, it's hard because to your point, Isabella, like we didn't have physical arcs, and like I know that probably meant that certain people couldn't read the book early, and how did that impact things? And all those questions definitely ran through my head again as a debut. I don't really know what the future holds, obviously. I think, I don't know if we're gonna have physical arcs. I have my fingers crossed. If you want to put good vibes into the universe, I'd love that. But I don't know. I think as in life, we're all just trying to find ways to keep going, because my therapist was telling me, like, we can't keep treating life like it's on hold. Like, our lives aren't on hold. These publishing journeys aren't on hold. So, if anyone has ideas about how to make it better, I'm all ears. But I think, I think bookseller support has been really meaningful to me during this time. And so, like, even having, the invitation to talk about the book with these amazing people on this call has been really heartening in a difficult time. So I think we'll keep finding ways to connect, and that's all we can do.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great time to be a romance reader, I think, because we are in the business of bringing hope, and we all need like a soft landing right now, and romance does that for us. So, I mean, it's tough. I've had 6 releases this year, and like, it's been weird, but I mean, also like the debut, like I think it's been wonderful that like debut authors have been able to do like a lot of virtual stuff and things like that, because it is tough. Like, you don't have the signings and things like that you're like looking forward to doing. But yeah, I mean, I think the romance community does kind of really rally behind its people. So it's nice that like for debut authors this year especially, it's been like a lot of community effort to kind of have people like really be able to put their books out there. But it's been rough.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that it's my debut book that has come out in a pandemic, because I think I don't know what it's like to publish a book that's not in a pandemic. Like, don't have the experience. Like, yeah, sure, I had, oh, maybe this could happen or this could happen, but I don't know. And I did have a couple of in-person events planned already that ended up, having to go virtual, which yeah, it was a letdown. But at the same time, I managed, my debut week, I did an event with someone else who's also in Michigan, an event with someone in Georgia, an event with someone in New York. Like, I was able to And even this, like, we're all able to be here and, on this panel together, in a way that may not have happened, if we were only doing things in person. So I guess I try to focus on the positive in that regard. Because I have been able to have some really amazing events that are virtual that I don't know that I would have gotten otherwise. And yeah, I really would love to, do signings and things in person and be able to do that. But also 100%, I would just like cry, because if people in person told me that my book was important to them, I would be a disaster mess. So this way, if you're just telling me on the internet, you can't see my face, like, I'm happy with it. So yeah, I definitely would have cried a lot more in that regard. But yeah, I'm just trying to focus on the positive, and it's been great to publish a book. Like, and as Adriana said, like, especially as romance writers, like, I am so happy to be bringing, this happy story to people in this time, and to be bringing something that maybe gives people hope or lets people read. Even I have had a hard time reading. And when this all first started, I didn't read for a long time. And then I like flew through The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. And it's, just another romance that it's like, oh, this I can read, like, this I can handle. This isn't too much for me, in a way that sometimes a lot of reading it has been in quarantine. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, we've definitely done so many events and been able to connect with so many authors and readers just around the country, around the world, that it's like the one positive that I'm able to see. This year, the blows keep on coming, but I was fortunate enough to be someone who just flew through books during the pandemic, I think, mainly because I was like sent home from college and then like all of a sudden in my house where I had to do chores and like just like not here for that. So just like all of a sudden flying through so many books when I had so many like textbooks to read and whatnot was a little bit of a bright spot. But I do want to pivot a little bit and talking about sex workers and romance, and also in other marginalized communities, because I think that obviously the roommate deals with the adult entertainment industry. And if you also, Rosie, I think it might be great to sort of talk about, there's a lot of discussion in the book about, about the terms that are used to describe whether it's adult entertainment, the porn industry, I think, and Clara sort of asking those questions to Josh. And if you want to, Adriana, also, if you want to talk about your work with the Advocacy Center, I think that would be awesome as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that allowed me to kind of write this book in I think a way that honors sex workers within the porn industry is that I actually worked with a subject matter expert. So I worked with a current male performer to have him review the work and to give any feedback about ways that I could make it more accurate. And so the discussion that I think you're referring to is around the terminology, to your point that Clara says, I never thought about it before, but is porn star, is that an accurate or sensitive term? Should I be saying something else? And it's something I talked with my subject matter expert, Lane, about. And he's like, it's not offensive. And that's the answer that Josh gives. But, in conversations with him and when we were, and even in reading that I did prior to engaging with him, they typically refer to themselves as performers, or often a lot of them do identify as sex workers. And so, making sure that Clara understood the nuance there, Clara in a lot of scenes serves as a kind of a proxy for the reader who may not be educated about these topics. And so, that's a way for me to make sure that the reader is learning about the industry in hopefully a way that doesn't feel like it's learn about the porn industry. So yeah, and I think, having a portrayal of people within the porn industry that didn't fall into stereotypes was really important to me. And also not just showing you one character who works in the porn industry was really important to me. So having Josh and Naomi are kind of your core characters that you meet, but there's a whole bunch of people that get involved in the business enterprise that they end up doing in this book. And you'll hear references to people on camera, off camera, things like that. Because again, it's not like anything. There's not like one experience that defines sex work. And that was important to me that like you can get to know Josh, but like he's a person. He's just as individual as anyone else. And his job doesn't define him. But it is part of his experience.
Yeah. And I thought one of the things that I loved about Josh, there are so many things to love about Josh. For those of you who are watching and might not have read it, Josh is amazing. But one of my favorite things is that he refused to partake in projects that he felt were demeaning toward women. And he got a lot of pushback from the people who he worked with. His agent in particular was kind of needling him and kind of like giving him a lot of crap for it. And I think that's, one of the reasons I don't want to say any spoilers, so I think I'll probably just stop talking. But yeah, I thought that the way that was handled was great. Oops, background noise.
I guess like one of the things I talk a lot about in all my stories, like I try to pay attention to like behaviors that are problematic, specifically in relationships between men and women. Not that there isn't domestic violence and interpersonal violence in all types of relationships, but just like it's just like proportionally there's just more. More violence in heterosexual like men and women, right? And so I think, and because it's largely what most of romance is relationships between men and women, thinking, and I do like a workshop. I do a workshop that is domestic violence and romance, writing the story survivors deserve. And it's basically kind of trying to like unpack a little bit some of the behavior, like the alpha hero and behaviors that can be like, why is it attractive for a man to like stalk you when you begin to date? Like behaviors that during the courting process, possessive controlling behavior, like, why are you buying me a car? We just met. These behaviors in real life don't turn out well. Like people who are possessive and controlling in the beginning in the relationship just become more possessive and controlling. And so that's the sort of thing that I like try to pay attention to and like try to bring attention to in my books. I also talk a lot about trauma survivors. Since I left the Advocacy Center, I pivoted a little bit in my work, and now I'm a trauma therapist. And I work in New York City, so I'm mostly with Afro-Latinx people. I only have Spanish-speaking clients, and I work in Harlem. So most of my clients are people who are from my community. And so I talk a lot about rendering survivor stories, trauma survivors in ways that are respectful, thoughtful, not using people's pain and people's trauma as plot devices, and things like that, or only making their stories about their pain, because survivors are resilient and they are whole people and they can experience joy even as they're healing. And so that sort of thing, or, just like being reductive around the ways they cope, or having negative or reductive language around the ways that they cope with the pain that the emotional pain they're experiencing. So that's the type of thing that I try to talk about largely in the community, but also like try to reflect in my books.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many. There's so much stuff just to unpack here. I think one of the things that both when Lynn and Leah and I met to discuss, one thing that I think really came up in our discussion was about sort of healthy relationships and realistic romance, and particularly going back to Naomi as a character, but also both Naomi and Everett. We haven't talked about Everett yet, but who's also an interesting character, even though he's absent for the majority of the book, and his absence is a big theme within the book. I think both sort of Naomi and Everett as sort of exes, not to each other, but that dynamic I thought we all thought was very, very interesting. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, both of those characters, I think out of the gate are subversion of tropes. So Everett is a twist on the boy next door, right? I think the setup of the book, the opening is meant to kind of be playful in the sense that you think that Clara has kind of had a traditional heroine's journey where she's taken a big risk and it's going to pay off because she's going to finally win the love of the man that she's been pining for 14 years. And immediately he's just a jerk and he just leaves. And so that was kind of fun for me because yeah, sometimes like you fall in love with the wrong person at the wrong time. And I really try to, and I think a lot of us like write realistic depictions of relationship dynamics. And so Clara's dynamic with Everett, even though they never have their romantic relationship never culminates. It's one-sided. And then Clara kind of realizes that she wasn't even really in love with him in the way that she's in love with Josh. She is in love with the idea of kind of being in love and having a healthy relationship. And she takes all of her yearning and kind of pins it on Everett. And that's something that she realizes at the end of the book. And I think they actually have a really frank conversation where they do care about each other. Like, I think, I actually like rag on Everett all the time, but he does care about her. And I think you can kind of see that a little bit. And he acknowledges that he knew she had feelings for him. And he kind of like, he never engaged with it because he's pretty self-centered and I don't think wanted to have that difficult discussion. But at the same time, I don't think he like wanted to hurt her. And I think, I don't know, to me, I've just known relationships like that where, again, like it's just, you think something could be and it's not. And I wanted to show that in the same way that I show Clara finding her person in Josh. So that's kind of Everett's role. And I really had fun with that. And then Naomi, and we touched on this a little earlier, she is the evil ex, except she's like not evil. She's like perfect. No, but she's an ex in the sense that their romantic relationship is over, but she is like a partner to them in every sense of the word throughout the rest of the book. So yeah, I think one of the best ways for me as a writer to engage with tropes is to make them like bend them, play with them, make them specific to the narrative that we're trying to build. And so I hope that that's what came across with those two characters.
Yeah, I think that with tropes, a lot of times you have to either, not just subvert them, but as you said, sort of bend them and make them work in order to not just make things sort of fresh and not just telling the same story over again that's already been told, but to make it realistic. Sometimes there is an ex who isn't evil at all and is still a part of the person's life and, all of that. Or sometimes the boy next door really turns out to be a jerk and you didn't love him. You just loved the idea of, falling in love with the boy next door. So I think those are things that are real and true. And that, we all do try to write realistic romances. I always feel so sad for the people who think that romance is unrealistic. Because I'm just like, no, it's not. And maybe you haven't found, a person who is willing to, do this grand gesture or whatever with you or for you, but that doesn't mean that it's unrealistic. That doesn't mean it's never going to happen. Or even with the conversations around consent being like, oh yeah, romance is, unrealistic in this regard. No, it's not. And it shouldn't be. And we're not just trying to write healthy relationships because, it's important to us that our relationships be healthy, but in the books, but I'm also sort of trying to present them because it's important to me that people see healthy relationships, and can hopefully come to recognize that this isn't unrealistic or, improbable or unlikely, that this is something that you can look for and that you can find.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, again, like for me, I write queer people, I write Black people. And so to me, it's really important to reflect the reality. I like write about immigrants. It's important to me to reflect the realities of like the lives of people who come from another place to make a life here, to pursue their version of the American dream. So it's important to me to ground that in like reality, in my experience, the beauty of my culture. And so to me, that's kind of like the beauty of like romance. Like we get these love stories, but we also get these like communities, we get this found family. I love writing about found family. And so like for my books that I wrote set in Ithaca, like I had such a beautiful community there and I wanted to like write about it. And a lot of my adult life I've lived in different places. I've been an expat in other countries. And so like writing about those people that you find that become your family is something that, and then falling in love and having those people kind of like hold you up as you go for that love is beautiful to read about. Especially now when we're like so isolated from each other. I think romance is it's a great place. Like I've been reading a ton of fanfic, but like it's such a great, like the Marvel universe is like my friend right now. So like it's like very much like that, like people holding you up and us being able to also give to readers, like for example, people who are not used to reading about Dominican immigrants or queer couples or about the porn industry and sex workers, like being able to like read about that and then build a connection and build empathy for those people because you're rooting for them because you want them to fall in love. I think that's like the superpower of romance, is that we are like really like building a bridge for people to connect to experiences that they may not think they have anything in common with. Ruby Lang she's a Taiwanese Canadian author, and I wrote a piece last year about immigrant stories, and she said something that stuck with me, is that like people who write about people in the margins, like we're world building in our books, but we're world building for the reader because we're expanding their understanding of what love can be and the way love can look and the way love can exist in the world. And that's like, I think, like really, really like the superpower that we have as romance writers.
Yes,
I love
please.
that.
Yes, please.
That's great.
Yeah. I love that vision of the three of you writing that into the world.
I like almost want to see like a book that's like co-written by all three of you together. So good.
I just also wanted to mention, I read recently a long thread on Twitter about like a straight woman realizing how much she wanted a queer relationship on television that you really root for. And that, a lot of, yes, there's sort of been big strides in queer representation on TV, but, there's not necessarily like regardless of my current feelings on Friends, like the Ross and Rachel, of a queer couple. There's not that sort of long drawn out that everybody wants them to get together and see what happens in the end sort of thing. And that's not just important for queer people to see. I think it is important for queer people to see, but it's also important for non-queer people to see as that this is still something that you want to root for and that brings you happiness, even though you can't necessarily like identify with it, as perfectly as maybe a queer person could. But that doesn't mean that it's not important to you still. And it was a really great thread about this woman sort of realizing that, she really wanted a queer couple that you really root for in TV. And I definitely write for queer readers. Queer readers are my heart and soul. But I do think that it's also important for non-queer readers. I hope that I give them couples to root for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we have some books about queer people falling in love that we can get on TV right now. So if you're a TV producer and
if you're watching this,
I got some books for you.
Yeah. As a filmmaker, I second that. This has been such a great conversation. There's just so much to talk about here. I think I would love to, I think there's sort of two more things we wanted to talk about sort of related to just books in general, I believe. The first is I'd love to know about all of your upcoming books. Meryl, I know I've seen on Edelweiss that you have a book coming up soon. I know Adriana has one that just came out. I know you're working on some. I know you have some that are already scheduled to be released. And Rosie, of course, I know we've talked a little bit about Naomi's book that's coming out in 2021. But I'm sure we'd all love to hear more about all of them.
Who has the next release? Is April the closest, or does anyone have one before that?
I have two.
Okay, you go first. I feel like chronological.
Still.
Yeah, let's roll them out.
I have the novella coming out. It's a historical novella in an anthology with Sierra Simone, Joanna Shoup,
oh, the
Eva Lee,
Dukes, yes.
Duke. It's Dilf, Duke. I'd like to F. And my novella is called The Duke Makes Me Feel, and it's a Dominican British herbalist root worker who meets a Duke, and they go to Paris, and things happen. And then I have my last little novella, which is in the Dreamers universe. It's set in Ithaca. It's called American Christmas, and it's Yin and Ari, who are the two workers who, like, the first two employees that Nesto from the first book hires, and it's like their little love story. I'm calling it like the gift of the Magi remix, but because I don't know how else to describe it. But those are the two that I have coming up.
That sounds amazing.
So good. I can't wait. What are your do you want to say the release dates?
Yes, it's Duke Makes Me Feel comes out November 7th, and American Christmas, I think, is like the first week of December.
That was like basically just for me, so I can get ready.
I'm so excited.
And Naomi's book, if you want a little more information about that, it's called The Intimacy Experiment. It is set in the same world as The Roommate 2 years after. Josh and Clara do make an appearance. I found that question. And it is coming out April 2021, but it's available for pre-order, and you can read about it on Goodreads and all that good stuff.
My book too is probably coming out later than Edelweiss says it is, because it's still in revisions. I'm finishing revisions this week. And yeah, I will have a book 2 coming out probably in fall of next year. It is not a sequel to something to talk about. It is in a different world. And it is about 2 women who do a podcast together and end up falling in love.
Oh my gosh. Sounds amazing.
Say the title. Say the title.
I have not said the title. It's on Edelweiss if you really want to look it up. I'm hoping to like announce it at some point.
Okay.
So I'm not saying
Okay. Then I'll just hype it and say it's amazing.
I can't wait to read that.
Yeah, I can't wait to read all of these. Hopefully I manage to still get all my schoolwork done. And then, yeah, Leah knows exactly what I tell you about. So then I think I'd love to sort of bring things together by, if everyone could, like, I think all of us maybe can go around and give some romance recommendations, because I think one of the things that's been the theme of this discussion is the hope that we get when reading romance, and the happiness that we feel, and how it makes us believe, and how it brings a bright spot to our lives at all points. But I think even in times that are darker and where it's difficult sometimes to get out of bed, that romance is one of the genres, if not the genre, that manages to hold us all together.
Yeah.
Do we need to go clockwise, or maybe it's counterclockwise? I don't know if everyone's configuration on the screen is the same as it is for me.
I can go because I'm basically like counting down the months by romance releases at this point. Like that's what I have to look forward to. The end of the year has got some really great stuff for us all to look forward to. So Olivia Dade has, spoiler alert, coming out in October. It is like the fanfic cosplay plus size rep in such a beautiful way, Book of My Dreams. So that one's really soon. Check that out. Spoiler alert, by Olivia Dade. And then in December, Denise Williams has How to Fail at Flirting, which is like a soft, strong woman. And if you liked Clara making to-do lists, like I guarantee you'll like the heroine in this one. It's got kind of like a nerdy hero, if that's your bag. And Denise is a debut, and that's December 1st. So those are two that I've gotten a sneak peek at and I've loved, and I think are going to really help me get through the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Those are two that I'm very excited for, actually, in addition to the intimacy experiment being a bonus for me for finishing my revisions. How to Fail at Flirting is also one of them. I have like 6 books lined up that I'm like, give it to me next week. So I'm gonna have to like take next week off work once I finish these, and just so that I can read. Spoiler alert was going to be one that I also suggested. I will instead suggest one by Olivia Dade that you can already get, which is 40 Love, which I describe it as like feeling like a warm hug. I just loved it. It's so perfect for like pandemic reading, because it's just quiet and happy and nice. I also always want to rec Rachel Spangler writes queer female romances. She has a whole bunch of them that are like sports related. She's done one on curling. She's done what I think my favorite of hers is The Edge of Glory, which is a like Olympic skier and snowboarder. And sort of, Ice Queen style. One of the characters is an Ice Queen and all of that. And yeah, I always rec her as somebody, Rachel Spangler as somebody for writing FF.
Sounds amazing.
I have actually like a sex worker series that I wanted to recommend. Aya de Leon, she writes contemporary, she's Afro-Latina, and she has one called The Justice Hustlers, and it's Afro-Latina women, and it's high stories. So it's like Afro-Latina women who are sex workers who kind of like have to like take justice into their own hands. So they're pretty fun. And she actually has a new book coming out, which sounds amazing. It's called A Spy in the Struggle. And it's about an FBI lawyer who basically infiltrates like a racial justice organization. And like basically she's like radicalized, but she did it kind of like thinking about like the Black Panthers and how the Black Panthers were infiltrated. So it just sounds amazing, and I really want to read it. The other one that I wanted to recommend was You Had Me at Hola by Alexis Daria. It's super tropey, super amazing romance between two Latinx telenovela actors. And The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa, which is just super delightful. Oh, and I have a bonus. Mila Vane, A Heart of Blood and Ashes. It's a barbarian romance. It's fantasy. It's a little dark, but truly everything we need in this times. It's a feminist hero. It's super hot, and this heroine is truly like perfection. Like, I love that book.
Leah.
Oh my gosh, I had to really think about this, because I've only been reading my like heavy textbook, like developmental psychology and like human rights stuff for the past like month and a half at this point. So I had to like look around my room, and I have my bookshelf. I have books kind of everywhere in my room. I can show. This is my like headboard behind my bed, and it's like covered in books. So the book that I'm going to recommend is one that I've talked about with Isabella before. It's called Woven in Moonlight. And I'm blanking on the author's name, but it's right over there. So I can
Isabella Ibanez.
Thank you, Isabella. I love you. But it's such a good, it's a fantasy romance, and the female main character is like such a strong, interesting character. It's set in, I believe, like I don't want to get it wrong. I think it's some sort of like world building that's based on like a magical South America potentially, but I'm like Latin America, I'm not entirely sure. I don't want to get it wrong. And it's just, it had such beautiful like language. The writing was just so beautiful. And the imagery was so amazing. I totally like saw all of the colors that she was describing. And that's kind of what I look for in books a lot of the times. I want to just like see the world. So that's the book that I can recommend. And then I've just been reading, like I can recommend my Africana Studies textbook too otherwise. So I won't do that.
Lynn, what about you?
Well, I'm excited because, as I said, I'm new to the world of romance. But what I would, the recommendation or ad, I am a huge YA fan. And so Mackenzie Lee and A Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue is actually, I feel like fits right in with this conversation about kind of constructing consent and slow burn, and just a really beautiful relationship in that book, in a YA book setting. So yeah, so toss Mackenzie Lee.
Not to break in and take more time, but I just, since you're YA, I'll also suggest.
Yeah, I'm the YA person at PSB. I'm happy to
yeah.
YA.
Yeah, Late to the Party by Kelly Quinlan is a FFYA with just like, I finished it. I sat in one spot and read and finished it at like midnight. Immediately screamed about it on Twitter, and then like woke up the next morning and was like, okay, you guys are awake now. I'm gonna yell about it some more. It's just messy queer teens like trying to figure it out, which is just like exactly my jam. So that is absolutely like, that's a must read. That for 2020, it's one of my absolute favorites this year.
It's on my list. So this list is going to get me through the winter this year. Doing this reading.
Yeah, really great. So yeah, I'm like I think probably 80% of what I read is YA. Like I'm definitely the YA person at the store. But for me, I think I have three sort of recommendations. One is one I feel like a lot of people have read it, but if you haven't by any chance read it, you should read it. And it's Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. And it had, like Rosie's book, it has been optioned for film, I believe. Maybe it's television. I don't remember. But it's just, I love it so much. And I love the idea, the hopeful idea behind it, that two boys can fall in love and still be world leaders and world changers and not have it end in tragedy. And I think that that's such an important message. And that's been out for a year or two at this point. So you could definitely pick it up now. And then right here, actually, one of my next reads is going to be Ties That Tether. I'm really excited to read that one. It's from the same imprint as Rosie's and Meryl's books. And as I'm Nigerian, I'm very excited to read a romance about a Nigerian woman. And then just in general, I know she can be controversial, but I am a huge Sarah J. Maas fan. Just the fantasy romance, I feel like she's kind of the queen of fantasy romance, and in particular her newest release, which is an adult book called, well, it's not called Crescent City, it's a series, but it just has just tons of stuff. I mean, it's got feminism, it's got commentary on human rights, it's got everything, and like a paranormal urban fantasy setting. So those are my recommendations. Do we have any comments in the chat? Well, I think that kind of wraps it up. We had such a great conversation and there's so much to talk about. But I do want to remind everyone that all of these authors, Rosie's book, The Roommate, Meryl's book, Something to Talk About, and we have definitely, they go so fast, but I know we have all of the books in the Dreamer series. So you can pick up all three or really 6 books, 5 books, I think, if you would like, at Buffalo Street Books. You can order online or you can pop into the store. We're open for socially distant browsing and purchasing. And of course, this video will still be available to watch afterwards. So if you know someone who, or multiple someones who love romance, and who just, or anyone who just wants a good book, this will be up for them to watch. And we can't thank the three of you enough for being here today, and to Aaliyah and Lynn, as always, for working with the store on numerous occasions, and for bringing your expertise and your passion to all of these discussions is just truly incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Like, such thoughtful questions, such thoughtful discussion. Really, really appreciate
Thank you all.
this.
Yeah, this has been
Thank you so
great.
much, everyone.
Yeah, okay. All right, good night, everybody. We're going to end the broadcast.
Good night.
Thank you.